Joining me now, David Smick. David, let me, I want to also let the audience know you're a former Ronald Reagan economist. Why do you think we ended up with this sort of spending bill when I think a lot of conservatives would have been fine with the government shutting down?
I'll be the contrarian. I think it would have been a disaster to have the government shut down. I think President Trump's biggest problem right now is he needs to fixate on two issues, and now we're getting an issue a day. And had he been sidelined for the next 3 or 4 weeks on a big fight in Congress over the budget of shutting down the government, it might have felt good, but it would ruin his larger plan, which is to reform the tax system and to replace Obamacare.
Okay.
And I just think it would have been. Look, I don't like the way this was negotiated. I think the president made a mistake of giving up on his wall. If you're going to ask for the wall, give it up at the last minute. But he gave it up days ahead of time. But you know, he's learning on the job. But I got to tell you, there's a problem. Congress can do one thing at a time and occasionally 2 things, and they can't do 5 things.
But here's the problem, David. Let me jump in because it's not just the wall, right? There's continued funding for sanctuary cities. The National Institute of Health, which was going to take a big, giant cut in the original Trump budget, gets a $2 billion increase. There's $300 million for Puerto Rico and Medicaid expansion. A lot of people are upset there's still funding for Planned Parenthood. So, it's not that you're doing one thing at a time. You've just given up some critical things that people put you in the White House for. This is, by the way, why the Republicans were propelled into office over the last several elections.
The Republicans got into office to get rid of Obamacare and replace it, and to reform the tax system because the economy is lackluster. We can't go through another 4 or 8 years with 1.5% GDP growth. So keep your eye on the big picture. Now, I found the stuff in there as appalling as any other conservative, but the game now is we have to get the president focused on these 2 things, and he can't be like, what was today? A gas tax. I mean, come on. Let's fixate on these 2 things and get them accomplished. And having a shutdown of the government, a huge fight, it would have been fun. We would have all, beat our chests and said, yes, these are right. And you know what? We would have won the battle and lost the war because getting things done on Capitol Hill, and I go back into the late 70s, it's all about momentum. And if you sideline yourself, you lose momentum.
I'm glad you brought that up, David. I want you to stay right there. I want to bring in a panel to help us hash this out. Ron Meyer, Ford O'Connell. If we're talking about momentum, Ford, blinking, falling over, giving up. I mean, that's the worst kind of momentum. That's stumbling out of the starter's gate. How do you catch up from there, Ford?
Well, there's no question that the Republican-controlled Congress got rolled bigly, as President Trump would say, by the Democrats. But I do have to say that I do agree with David Smick here. You do want to keep the government open. Let's hope that this was more of a strategic retreat, Charles, than a more ominous side coming down the road, because we're going to revisit this right after September 30th. But I think the biggest concern here is not just getting crushed on the wall, not just getting crushed on sanctuary cities, Charles. It's also, as you pointed out, leaving the EPA budget intact. Trust me, you want to hurt growth, let the EPA keep regulating things. The NIH, Puerto Rico, everything there, the Democrats got everything they wanted more, and there was a lot more leverage, particularly on border security. Remember, we only got $1.5 billion on border security, and the Democrats in 2013 were willing to go in for $40 billion. So we got hosed every which way to Sunday.
Ron, all I'm hearing right now are the main, these are establishment talking points. I hate to say it, I love Ford and I like David's work, but these are establishment talking points. You know, today, if you notice, Speaker Ryan put out a big checklist of all the great things that were accomplished with this, and we should feel good about it. So what? Why not shut down the government? 80% of the workers are quote-unquote non-essential anyway. Isn't that the point of the election, to do these kind of things that may otherwise have been drastic, but to do it because that's the only way you clean the swamp?
Well, you know, I think a lot of conservatives are feeling exactly how you're feeling, a little bit betrayed. The truth is Washington should be absolutely in love with this budget, because this budget, this type of spending, this is a higher level of spending than was done under the Obama administration. This is President Obama's dream. Nancy Pelosi put out a glowing press release. Chuck Schumer put out a glowing press release. Everyone who loves spending loves this budget. Increases military spending, domestic spending, NIH spending, which is some of the most wasteful spending in government. Here, you have $1. Everybody gets $1. That's how we keep the government open. Everybody gets money.
Right.
And so that's what's happened.
Charles, I want to say one thing. I got to say one thing. I have never been called establishment on your show before, so let's start this right there. It's not that they kept the government open, which they need to do, to David's point. It's that they got such a bad deal in keeping the government open. That is what should hack off rank-and-file Republicans, and it's not Donald Trump's fault. It's Republicans who have yet to learn how to govern, and that is the biggest problem. They don't know what they want.
David, when Chuck Schumer says, when he praises the deal, is, quote, a good agreement for the American people, I'm inclined to agree with Ron. That is perhaps the biggest red flag. I didn't need to read it. Once I saw that, I knew something was wrong.
No, it is ugly. It is ugly. But you know what? Think in the long term. What you really want to do is have long-term fixes to the budget that are dramatic and conservative. And you get that by doing health care reform. And
so, David, let me just stop you. I want you to walk us through this. I want you to walk us through the next step, because in my mind, the Republicans gave up a lot on this. So when they go back to the negotiating table, what do they say?
Okay. Look, it was terrible what that bill. But at the end of the day, you have to build momentum. And once you get a 3% economy, a 3.5% economy, then you catch the attention of those 25 Democratic senators who are up for re-election, and you come back next year and you say, are you really willing to vote against our budget? And then you have a true budget. But you can't do that now.
Ron,
without
let me bring in Ron for a minute. Because I mean, we're making it, how do we get to that 3% budget if we can't get Trump's economic agenda through? I mean, if we're talking chicken and egg, you know, I understand where David's coming from, but if they keep giving up without even firing a shot, Ron, then how do you ever get to that ultimate goal of 3 or 4% growth?
Well, I agree that sometimes in football you have to punt. But the point is, you're not supposed to whiff on the punt, right? And so that's what I kind of feel like this deal is. It's a whiffed punt. Yes, sometimes you have to play chess. Yes, sometimes you have to actually pick your battles. But this seems like even beyond that. I understand strategery. I understand that. But why is Sean Spicer going out there praising this deal from day one? Why aren't we negotiating a little harder on this? I mean, there are 5 days left in the week here, and they basically already given up and tried to punt and then whiffed.
Go ahead,
Charles, to your point, Democrats are betting that the Republicans will never, ever figure out how to govern before the 2018 midterms. And they figure that tax reform won't get through, and if it doesn't get through, they'll take back the House. The Democrats are unified in what they're doing. What the Republicans, particularly in the Senate, have to realize going forward is pick what you want and get those W's, because if you can't put the fear of God in the Democrats that are up for re-election in 2018, guess what? The Trump experiment's going to be dead as we know it, and America's going to be worse off.
Well, I think the problem, David, is that they've all picked what they want as individuals, not as a party, not as a team. You know, in this particular case, to be quite frank with you, to borrow Ron's analogy, I wouldn't even have a punter on the field at all. I would have entered the game without a punter. But be that as it may, you've been there. You understand how it works.
Let me tell you, it's always frustrating. I look back on the Reagan tax plans, and people thought it was really easy. Both of those tax reforms were very frustrating. We sat in the same situation, but at the end of the day, you have to be smart about it, and you have to look and look. The fight is going to be over tax reform. And we can't be sidelined. That's going to be the major battle. We'll get health care reform through too, but the battle will be tax reform, because that is revolutionary. If you're really not talking about draining the swamp in terms of the tax code, cleaning out the barn.